imitated heart opens and closes. The imitated heart opens and closes. The imitated heart opens and closes. My imitated heart opens and closes. Hooker, the alley beneath neon red. And I wrote this song for the lovesick John, and handshake at the edge of a bed. And I wrote this song for the beggar, the silent tin can lament, passerbys with concrete eyes and sand in their pockets. And I wrote this song for the symphony, a billion shuffling feet, for every face in and out of this place that I'll never meet. Those painters talk to colors, keep whiskey in the drawer, and everyone will be nameless, and the ceiling kisses the floor. So come on, record player, won't you spin us another chord? Just one more, just once more. I wrote this song for the trash cans, the newspaper in the street, the midnight dogs turn the moon off and on as they look for something to eat. Song for the daughter, the man who invented the gun, the man who was shot and the man who was not, but he walks like he's won. I wrote this song for the soldier, foreign soil on his hands, child born in a uniform, never made to understand that painters talk to colors, keep whiskey in the drawer, and everything will be pointless, the ceiling kisses the floor. Oh, so come on television, won't you show us another war? Just one more, just once more. House in the field, the picture still on the windowsill, secret well concealed. Wrote this song for the doorway, perfect silence it comes true. For the confident, dejected, the embraced and rejected, I wrote it for you. And it goes, painters talk to colors, keep their whiskey in a drawer, but everything will be beautiful when the ceiling kisses the floor. Oh, so come on, record player, show me what all this is for. Just once more, just once more. Show me just once more. Show me just once more. Well, the dogs in the alley mistake headlights for the moon, and I can hear them howling from the window of this room, where my friend, the shadow boxer, wipes the sweat from his brow, and he says imagination seems to get the best of him somehow. And my head is spinning, the room begins to shake. Oh, I would be lying if I said that I can't relate. I've been waking up screaming. The reason I can't recall, and I got a dream catcher hanging from the wall. Oh, help me rest easy. Take these heavy thoughts. Yes, I got a dream catcher. Like war drums, and the wind like a widow wail. I can hear it from the harbor, where the sinking ship sets sail. Now the shadow boxer's knocked down, and he's swinging from his knees. Says you even gotta fight just to plead for some mercy. Got a rose in my hand. Oh, I would be lying if I said that I don't understand. Please help me rest easy. Take these heavy thoughts. I've been waking up screaming. The reason I can't recall, and I got a dream catcher hanging from the wall. Yes, I got a dream catcher. I've been waking up screaming. The reason I can't recall, and I got a dream catcher hanging from the wall. Oh, help me rest easy. And take these heavy thoughts. Yes, I got a dream catcher.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to SoulFood Books. Today we're going to be speaking the truth, and we figure there's no better way to start the truth than with a couple of songs. It's a pleasure to have you guys here.
Blood will flow when flesh and steel are one, drying in the colors of the evening sun. Tomorrow's rain will wash the stains away, but something in our mind will always stay. On and on, the rain will fall like tears from a star, like tears from a star. On and on, the rain will say how fragile we are, how fragile we are. Perhaps this final act was meant to clinch this lifetime's argument. And nothing comes from violence, and nothing ever could. For all those born beneath an angry star, lest we forget how fragile we are. On and on, the rain will fall like tears from a star, like tears from a star. On and on, the rain will say how fragile we are, how fragile we are. A star, like tears from a star. On and on, the rain will say how fragile we are, how fragile we are. Tomorrow's rain will wash the stains away, but something in our mind will always stay. Stay.
Thank you very much. My name is Clint McCune. This is Chris Kajorski, and both of us are singer-songwriters who aren't afraid to come up and sing about what's going on in our country. I'd like to take this next moment to invite up the co-owner here, Sarah Pelfrey, to officially introduce the day today. Come on up, Sarah.
Well, welcome everybody. First of all, I want to say thank you. Thank you for caring enough about what happens on this planet to show up today. 6 years ago, if you can imagine it, this building was white and there was nothing on the floors and there were these dents in the walls, and we sat right where our fountain was and we thought, okay, so we've got this opportunity. What do we want to do? What do we really want to do here? And it was in that moment where we truly understood we wanted to build a place where people could come together, where we could talk, where we could sing, where we could do art, and where we could cultivate this sense of compassion and kindness and pair it with forward action, because that's what really makes the world the place that we want to be. And as I was sitting there, I have to admit, 6 years later, I didn't necessarily think I would be in this space right here and right now. As a child, my parents were really active in not only as social workers, but as social rights and as trying to protect the planet that we're on. And I remember sitting with my dad one day, and my dad was talking about, he was telling me it was actually after we watched E.T., and I was super excited, and I was like, all right. And then we had heard something on the radio about somebody trying to shoot something up into space, and it would have all of this radioactive stuff. And in my little brain, I was totally horrified, because what happens if you hit E.T.'s friends and they were coming to get him? And like, this was not going to work out so well. And one of the things that I remember was my dad was like, well, don't worry about it, sweetie. There are people out there who are making sure that's not going to happen. And it's through those moments as a child that I knew, like, okay, well, that's what I want to do. As I get older, I want to make sure that those things don't happen, because I know that there is a lineage in which I come from with people who care, and people who are going to step up and talk to other people who might have more power than them, and that might look at them, and they might even quake in their boots when they use their voice, but they're worth, they will do it, and they will do it for us, and they will do it for themselves, and they will do it for the people after them. So today I am feeling like 6 years of hard work has brought me to this point where I get this opportunity to introduce somebody who actually was so influential as a child. And so please put your hands together for Mr. Bruce Gagnon, please.
Hello. Oh, okay. Thank you for being here, and thank you for having me, and thank you for those 2 wonderful songs, by the way. Give them another hand, would you? Very good stuff. Well, my name is Bruce Gagnon, and I live in Bath, Maine, and I'm here on a speaking tour. I began on April 1st in San Diego. 30 days, 24 cities along the way, stopping every day in a different community, taking the train most of the time, which has been a beautiful treat. I'm an absolute huge supporter of public transportation. So last night I was in Bellingham, and here I am today. I want to thank Tom Shea and Leonard Iger for organizing my activities over the next couple days in this area, so give them a hand for their good work. The Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space was created 20 years ago to prevent the nuclearization and the weaponization of space. And this story that Sarah just alluded to was probably the 1997 launch of Cassini with 72 pounds of plutonium from the Space Center in Florida by NASA to go out into deep space. And in their environmental impact statement, NASA acknowledged that if there was a launch pad explosion at the time of the launch, and the plutonium would be released as dust in a worst-case scenario and carried by the winds for a 60-mile radius from the Space Center as far westward as Orlando and Disney World. Can you imagine Disney World having to shut down because of a plutonium disaster? North to Daytona Beach, Florida, and south to Vero Beach, Florida, a big area. And that they would have to go in, they said, and remove all the people. And then they'd have to go in and remove the buildings. And then they said they would have to go in and remove all the vegetation. Imagine that. And then they said they would have to go in and remove all the animals, the birds, the fish, the squirrels, the alligators, the snakes, the butterflies. And then they'd have to go in and remove the top half-inch of soil because everything would be radioactive for thousands and thousands of years. After Hurricane Katrina, you know, it was clear to me that this was a total pipe dream. I knew it beforehand, but Katrina made it even more real. And in fact, there was a man by the name of Alan Cohn. He had just retired from NASA at the time of the 97 launch of Cassini with 72 pounds of plutonium-238, the most toxic substance ever created by humankind. And he called me and he said, I was the emergency preparedness officer when NASA launched Galileo in 1989 and Ulysses in 1990 that also carried plutonium on board. And he said, our relocation plan, our emergency evacuation plan, our cleanup plan is an utter joke. It doesn't exist. And I said, would you be willing to talk to the media? And he said, yes, I would. And so we actually arranged for him to be interviewed by the New York Times, and they did a big story about him prior to the launch. And all over the country, I worked for 3 years to build that campaign, and all over the country, people were doing extraordinary things to try to stop that Cassini launch, and around the world as well. My favorite story was the activists on Tasmania, Australia. Now this was incredible. They set up a fax machine in front of their government building on a Saturday in a park and got 1,000 people to send faxes to the White House saying, we don't want this launch to happen. And so at that time, the Clinton administration was hearing from people literally all over the world as people began to understand the dangers of this, what I call bad seed, of carrying this bad seed of nuclear and war and greed and unrestrained ambition into the heavens. Just a few days ago, actually, let's see, where was I at the time? I was in Olympia, Washington, and speaking there at a place similar to this, actually, Traditions Cafe it's called, you probably know it. And a man stood up and said, Bruce, did you see this article in our paper today about they're going to go out and mine the asteroids? And I hadn't seen it, but he gave it to me afterwards. And one of the Google rich guys that got rich from Google was one of the investors in this corporation that wants to go out and mine the asteroids. Well, you should know that the nuclear industry is very excited about the idea of mining the sky because they say that they would be able to build nuclear-powered mining colonies on the moon, where they say there's helium-3 in water, on Mars, where they say there's magnesium and cobalt and uranium. And in fact, I think you all know about that corporation called Halliburton. You've heard of it before? I noticed in the Petroleum News magazine a few years ago, they reported that Halliburton was building a drilling mechanism to mine on Mars. So they're already kind of working ahead of us, planning for the day when they can go to Mars with these nuclear-powered mining colonies and nuclear rockets with reactors that would cut in half the amount of time it takes to get to Mars, because with conventional rockets, it takes a year to get there, and they say the astronauts' bodies would be like jello because of space radiation. So they want nuclear reactors to make it quicker to get there. And so just imagine from Cape Canaveral in Florida, a whole host, a succession of these launches with nuclear materials on rockets that occasionally blow up, and having a worst case release of plutonium, and having to declare major portions of the state of Florida off limits, radioactive, for as long as one can imagine. It's absolutely insane. So this is the work that our organization has been trying to bring to the people of America and around the world. This question, what kind of seed should we carry with us as we inevitably begin to move off this planet? I remember the Star Trek Prime Directive. Remember that? Do no harm. Well, I'm afraid that these people have all kinds of visions in their minds that are not good for us. I want to share another story. I shared it on the radio this morning on Mike McCormick's show. He asked me about the Nazis. Tell me the story about Operation Paperclip, he said. When the U.S., after World War II, brought Nazi scientists to the United States to create the U.S. space program. Well, it wasn't just Nazi scientists that they brought. In fact, the U.S. brought 1,500 of the top Nazi operatives. Nazi intelligence were brought to the U.S. to help create the CIA. Werner von Braun, the rocket scientist that built the V-1 and V-2 rockets that Hitler was using to terrorize the cities of London and Paris and Brussels towards the end of World War II. Von Braun and 100 of his rocket team that were set up inside of a mountain chain in Germany called the Harz Mountains, where there was a big tunnel, and they cleared it out. And in there they put the rocket operation where they were building these with 40,000 slaves, Jews, gypsies, homosexuals, French resistance fighters, other prisoners of war. And by the time the war was over and the U.S. came there to liberate the people at this Dora concentration camp, they discovered that the Nazis had killed 25,000 of the 40,000 people that were there as slaves building these rockets. Well, the United States brought in then 100 of these Nazi rocket scientists to the U.S., along with 100 copies of the V-2 rocket to create the U.S. space program. They stationed them in Huntsville, Alabama, at Redstone Arsenal. And the guy that was von Braun's boss, the man that was sort of in charge of the whole program, Major General Walter Dornberger, Hitler's liaison for his program, he became the vice president of Bell Aerospace in New York. And in 1953, he testified before the Congress of the United States of America, saying, "Gentlemen, I didn't come to this country to lose the Third World War. I lost 2 already." And he gave his vision to the Congress about orbiting battle stations that we would use to control the Earth below and to control the pathway on and off the planet as we inevitably wanted to move out into space and begin to do things like mine the sky, right? Crazy, huh? And then there were these Nazi scientists in Germany that were taking Jews and putting them in freezing temperatures to see how the body would react to cold water in case a pilot was downed in the Baltic Sea. And they were brought to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio and put in charge of the Air Force's flight medicine program. And then there were the Nazi scientists that were doing mind control experiments. They were brought to the U.S. under Operation Paperclip. And you might have heard of MK Ultra and the LSD drug experiments of the 60s when people were jumping out of windows because they were having bad trips. These were the former Nazi scientists doing those. So the entire military-industrial complex seated with 1,500 of Hitler's top operatives. And I have to ask the question, was there an ideological contamination that came along with them? Was there? Well, a few years ago, this journalist, a writer for the sort of one of the Bibles of the military-industrial complex called Jane's Defense Weekly. It's a British publication. He wanted to find out what were the origins of this secret black budget in the United States, this Pentagon budget that is at least $50 billion a year, that the Congress is not even allowed to know how the money is spent. What were the origins of this? And so he wrote a book about it, and he traced it back, guess where? To Operation Paperclip. It was a Hitler program that Hitler used to do top secret space technology, weapons technology development without their government knowing anything about it. And they planted that architecture right here in the good old US of A when the Nazis came over. So clearly, this writer in his book said, yes, indeed, there was an ideological contamination. And so is it any wonder today, then, that our country is on this cycle of endless war, what I call the military-industrial complex, as a criminal syndicate? Let me tell you a bit about myself. I grew up in an Air Force family. My dad was in the military. We moved all the time. And in 1968, we were living in the panhandle of Florida. So conservative there that they call it Lower Alabama, up in the Northwest, you know. And I was 16 in 68, and I had my first organizing experience working on the Nixon campaign for president when he was running, the man with the secret plan to end the war in Vietnam. And I did such a good job working on that campaign that they had a fish fry fundraiser right before the election. And they asked me to sit at the head table with their speaker that evening, former senator from South Carolina. You might have heard of him. He's dead now, a guy by the name of Strom Thurmond. A Dixiecrat, they called him. So that's how I got started in politics. And then from there, it kind of went downhill after that. In 1971, I tried to join the Air Force because I wanted to be like my father. I wanted to be a career man. You know, because I grew up behind the military barbed wire fences. I went to the military schools. I was a Boy Scout. You know, I swallowed the whole patriotic line. And so, as it turned out, I flunked my induction physical because of an old high school football injury. So I had to get a waiver to get into the military when most people of good sense were trying to stay out of the military in 1971 during the Vietnam War. And so after my training, I was sent to a base in California, an airlift base for the war, Travis Air Force Base, where GIs came by the thousands to get on the planes to go to Vietnam, and when the planes would return, they would bring the body bags of the dead soldiers. And just across the street from where I worked on the flight line, you could see almost daily the rows and rows and rows of body bags. And so the first day I checked into the barracks, into what they called the orderly room. You know, the military is very orderly. And they looked down this clipboard, and the guy says, oh my God, I'm really sorry, man. We've only got one room left. Get your bags, follow me. And we walked down this long, dark hallway, and he kept saying, really, man, I will get you out of here as soon as possible. And I thought it would be a little broom closet with a cot. And I'd spend a night or two in there before they found a room for me. And any way you can do something with these lights, they're killing me. Thank you so much. Mellow it out a little. Yeah, thank you. So anyway, he opened the door, and we walked in. It was a small room, you know, with two cots in it. But all over the war, kind of like this, there were anti-war posters all over the wall. And as it turned out, this guy was one of the leading organizers in the GI resistance movement in the barracks. And they wanted to keep him isolated because they didn't want him to infect anyone. But they forgot about me, and there I remained. And so at night, there'd be a knock on the door, and these white guys would come in with chairs and sit in a circle and talk about the war in Vietnam. And I'm sitting in the corner, this young Republican for Nixon that I still was, saying, oh my God, I think these are communists. And another night, there was a knock on the door, and they were black guys. They came in with chairs, and they sat in a circle. They were Black Panthers from the cities talking about racism in the military and racism across the nation. And I'm sitting in the corner thinking, these are really communists. And then, and I have to be frank with you, then they started smoking marijuana. And I had heard of marijuana before. But, you know, you have to remember, I lived on these military bases. And, well, I will confess that in the immortal words of Bill Clinton, I swear to God, I never, ever inhaled, not one time. I never did. But we've learned a lot over the years about the effects of secondhand smoke. And how people, very innocent people, can become victims of wafting smoke, wafting fumes. And I believe me sitting in the corner, terrified, probably my knees clamoring together about these communists, and then marijuana on top of that. This stuff had some effect on my brain. Because it wasn't long that my chair moved into their circle. And then after that, like I said, it all went downhill, you know, and I was in big trouble. So after about 6 months of this, reading their literature, listening to their discussions, everything else, and even, you know, partaking in these fumes, I decided that I was a conscientious objector. And so I asked to be released from the military. And their question to me was, well, what's your family history? Do you come from a traditional peace church, Quaker, Mennonite, Church of the Brethren? And I said, no, you know, I was a young Republican from a military family. And so they turned me down. And so I did 3.5 years of what I called hard time. Because after I figured out what was really going on in the military with the war, it was extremely hard for me to be there. But I became proudly what they called a royal. And a royal meant a royal pain in the ass. One of the things that happened to me while I was in the military was that one day I went to the base exchange during lunch, and I'm looking at the book rack, and there was this big, thick book entitled The Pentagon Papers. The government's secret history about how they fabricated the pretext in order to sell the war in Vietnam to the American people. As it turned out, there was this captain in the Marines by the name of Daniel Ellsberg. He went to Vietnam, came back. At this point, he's working at the Rand Corporation, who's in charge of pulling together this secret history that turns out to be 7,000 pages. And as he's doing it, his conscience is bothering him. So he decides to start sneaking it out of the Rand Corporation at night in pieces, taking it to a local copy center. And, you know, in the early 70s, some of you know, some of you don't know, that the copy machines were extremely slow. And it would take forever just to make one copy. So imagine 7,000 pages. The trauma night after night of him going there, expecting any moment the FBI to come charging through that door, apprehending him, and the American people never learning what was inside of these Pentagon Papers. But he succeeded in making the copies, and while he struggled to get some media in America to pay attention to it and to cover the story, he hid them in the home of Howard Zinn in Boston. But eventually the New York Times began to run excerpts from this, and it was published as a book, and I started reading it with my feet up on my desk in my office as a way to sort of bring attention to the fact that I'm reading this history that drove a stake through what few remaining illusions I had about my country. Imagine reading this part about Ho Chi Minh, the father of the independent Vietnamese nation. And after the French left, the United Nations stepped in and was going to organize an election. And the polls were showing that Ho Chi Minh was going to win by a vast majority. And the United States was not happy about that. So the CIA was sent in. And the Catholics were a minority in the north of Vietnam. And so the CIA fabricated a letter on Ho Chi Minh stationery saying that the first thing I'm going to do when I get elected is round up all the Catholics and kill them. And so the CIA then flooded the Catholic community with this fabricated letter. And then they organized a mass exodus of the Catholics from the north into the south. And of course, they brought in the American media to film the whole thing as the people flee from this insane Ho Chi Minh. The whole thing was a fabrication, of course. But it was shown on the American television the next day. And the day following, the Congress of the United States swung into action, appropriating money to defend these poor, innocent victims in Vietnam from this insane killer, Ho Chi Minh. But that wasn't enough. They then sent the CIA in to begin blowing up rail systems, ports, all kinds of terrorism within the northern parts of Vietnam. And this is what led to our long, long war, disastrous, insane war in Vietnam that helped change my life away from this military machine into a human being. I want to tell you another story, though, about this military industrial complex corporate criminal syndicate. When I was a boy, we lived in South Dakota for a while. My dad was stationed there in the Black Hills, Ellsworth Air Force Base. And we arrived in the middle of winter in a blizzard. And I remember looking out the window of our car at night, late at night, this raging, howling wind in the South Dakota blizzard. And I'm looking at these little white houses, shotgun shacks, I would call them, with holes in them, and realizing that whoever was living inside of there were freezing to death. And I learned that they were the Lakota people, the Sioux Indians. And so I became consumed in the 3 years we lived there with everything about Native American history and culture, religion, spirituality, I should say. Well, I want to tell you the story about Crazy Horse. During the Civil War, the weapons corporations were making a lot of money. You can imagine arming both sides, essentially, oftentimes building weapons that didn't work. But that's all right, because they were making a lot of money. You know, it didn't matter whether they worked or not. But after the Civil War was over, they found that the profits were drying up. And so they were getting a little worried. But they still had the Indian Wars going on out west. In Texas, the Comanches were being brought onto the reservation. In the Dakotas, pretty much most of the native people were brought onto the reservation, except for Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull's small band. Out here in Washington, I was in Walla Walla the other day. I understand that Chief Joseph was born in Walla Walla. That same year, 1877, was the year that he was chased, almost made it into Canada by the U.S. Army. But they were wrapping things up by that time. And so gold had been discovered in the Black Hills in South Dakota, and the Army's job was to clear a pathway so the settlers and the gold miners could get in there. And of course, they were killing the game, and the people were starving. The native people were starving. And the Army had invented a new high-powered rifle that they were using from the trains to systematically eliminate the buffalo, letting them rot on the plains floor. Something the people needed for their food and their clothing. Their entire way of life was centered around the buffalo. And so they were starving to death. So against their better judgment, finally in 1877, Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull agreed to come onto the reservation. And the deal was that they would give up their horses and their guns, but that the federal government would take care of them as long as the grass grew green. And so these weapons corporations were then contracted with to supply them food and clothing and blankets and everything else. But they started skimming at the top, and they were giving inferior products. The blankets were so thin that by the end of the winter they had holes in them and the people were freezing. The bacon was rancid. The flour had bugs in it. And so the people were starving on the reservation. They couldn't even go hunt, really, because they didn't even have a gun or a horse anymore. But that wasn't enough. The weapons corporations wanted more. And so they put together a media team. They had artists come in and do renderings of Crazy Horse back on the warpath, killing the settlers and the miners, raping white women, killing the children. And they had journalists write phony stories, and they planted these stories and the artist renderings in the newspapers all over the country, primarily in the East. And of course, the American people were outraged. We thought you had these savages on the reservations. Do something. And of course, the Congress again swung into action and appropriated more money to fight the Indian wars out west, when in fact, Crazy Horse was sitting in his teepee on the reservation with not a horse or a gun to his name. So the military-industrial complex, like any good criminal, has an MO, a modus operandi, a way of repeating themselves over and over again, a way of lying to justify selling fear and war to the American people so that they can maximize profit. That's the game they run on us. We saw it again in 2003 with shock and awe. Weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. We got to go in and take them out. And today we hear the same refrain again. Iran is going to attack us, going to attack Israel. When in fact, a month ago, Secretary of War, that good liberal Democrat from California, Leon Panetta, acknowledged on television that Iran has no nuclear weapons, nor do they have any missiles capable of hitting the east coast of the United States of America. But Boeing, your friends Boeing here, your good friends Boeing, they're building these high-altitude, mid-course missile defense systems. And their friends in the Congress are now saying that we need to deploy these on the east coast of the United States because Iran is getting ready to nail us. And so we need these systems to protect us from attack. So Boeing is pulling its levers to ensure that they get some more money out of the American taxpayers. Well, as I said, I think I said, I live in Bath, Maine. In Bath, Maine, we have a weapons contractor of our own there, owned by General Dynamics, called Bath Iron Works. They build Navy Aegis destroyers, warships, with so-called missile defense systems on board that today are being used to surround Russia and China by the Obama administration. Russia and China. Why are we trying to surround Russia? Why are we trying to restart the Cold War with Russia? Makes no sense. When Obama became president, he went to Prague in the Czech Republic and he announced that he wanted to reset relations with Russia and that he wanted to get rid of nuclear weapons. Why is Obama today surrounding Russia? Could it be because Russia today has the world's largest supply of natural gas and significant supplies of oil? And don't we know by now that the Pentagon's primary job is to serve as resource extraction service on behalf of corporate globalization? Remember that recent attack of Libya? Because we had to protect the people of Libya from this evil dictator, Gaddafi. You know, and how many people do we know bought the line one more time? But come to find out, guess what? Libya has the largest oil supply on the African continent. Could it be the reason why the United States and NATO invaded Libya was to take their oil and set up a puppet government that will now negotiate with U.S. and British oil corporations. Well, you know, the Pentagon's been saying for some time now that under corporate globalization of the world economy, every different country is going to have a different role. And they're saying, we in America, we're not going to make things anymore. We're not going to have jobs here anymore. We're not going to make shoes. We're not going to make clothes. We're not going to make refrigerators. We're not going to make electronics because it's cheaper to go overseas, right? Maximize profits internationally, cheap labor overseas. So millions and millions and millions and millions of jobs have moved overseas. Pentagon is saying our role under corporate globalization will be security export. And so is it any coincidence that today the #1 industrial export product of America is what? Weapons. And when weapons are your #1 industrial export product, what is your global marketing strategy for that product line? Endless war. That's right. And so that's where we are. 2 years ago, I heard, I don't know if any of you heard that Sears had come out with a new line of little boys' clothes. Any of you hear this? Well, there's a Sears store in the next town. Me and a friend went to check it out. We walk in, little boys section. Oh my God, there they are. An entire line of military uniforms, camouflage. And what's the message to young working class kids in America today? This is all you're going to be. This is your future. There aren't going to be any jobs. You're going to go to work killing people around the world in places where resources are scarce. Oil, natural gas, water, on the African continent, under the ground, minerals that are needed to make laptops and cell phones. That's why we recently created a new command at the Pentagon called AFRICOM, Africa Command. And I was watching C-SPAN a couple years ago, and there was this general. He was introduced as the head of all the 50 state National Guards in America. And he had this huge map of Africa, the African continent. And he was saying, what we're doing now is assigning each of the 50 state National Guards to a different African country on the continent to set up basing relationships. Lily pad bases, they call them, quick interventionary bases. He said to go after terrorists. But what they're really talking about is going after people that stand up against corporate globalization. They'll be taken out in these quick interventionary strikes from these lily pad bases throughout the African continent. All paid for by your tax dollars. Recently, I was watching a video of this black African farmer going out to work in his field one morning, and this white guy, an American in a suit, comes up and tells him to leave, get out of here. And the African says, what are you talking about? My family's been farming here forever. And the guy says, our corporation bought this. We own this land now. Get out of here. And so this is what's happening today. The corporations, corporate globalization is going and buying up the resource land in these countries around the world, and they expect that there's going to be pushback from the people. In fact, a few years ago, in one of the Pentagon planning documents put out by the Space Command called Vision for 2020, you can probably find it online, they said that under corporate globalization, we expect a widening gap between the haves and the have-nots. And as a result, there'll be more and more regional instability around the world. And with our space technology in place that coordinates all warfare on the Earth today, what they call net-centric warfare, we'll be able to see everything on the planet. We'll be able to hear everything on the planet by intercepting all phone, fax, and email communications through the NSA, the National Security Administration. And we'll be able to ultimately target every place on the planet below. This is the plan. At the same time, the U.S. is surrounding China with these so-called missile defense systems. Why are we surrounding China? They have any oil? No. But they have a big economy, and they're beginning to dwarf us. And corporate capitalism was worried about that. They're worried about anyone else being a competitor to them. And so they've determined that while we might not be able to compete with them economically, if we control China's access to resources, we'll hold the key to their economic engine. And so that's why recently, a couple months ago, Obama announced a pivot of U.S. foreign and military policy into the Asia-Pacific region, where we are now doubling our military presence. And in fact, he followed that up with a visit to Australia, where he announced that we're sending 2,500 Marines to Darwin in the north of Australia. I didn't know that Australia was in danger of being invaded by anyone. Had any of you heard that? But we're there, sending in the Marines to liberate Australia. But as it turns out, China imports 60% of their oil on ships through the Yellow Sea. If you look at a map, just off China's coast, and then over here on this side you have the Korean Peninsula, and just off the Korean Peninsula is this tiny little island called Jeju Island, a semi-tropical, pristine, World Heritage, UNESCO-recognized environmental World Heritage island. And right in between there, this Yellow Sea is where China imports 60% of their oil on ships. So if the United States could choke off China's ability to import its resources, we'd hold the key to their economic engine. And so that's the dangerous, provocative, insane, and expensive strategy now underway. And little Jeju Island, this jewel on the south side of the island is this little village called Gagnon village, 450-year-old fishing and farming village that today is being torn asunder as the United States is forcing the South Korean government to build a Navy base there so that we can port our Aegis destroyers with missile defense systems and our aircraft carriers and our nuclear submarines that are coming out of your neck of the woods, so that we can control, or as they like to say, manage China. And this village voted 94% to say, we don't want this Navy base there. It was called an absolute preservation area by the South Korean government, but they just washed away the environmental protection that they had of this village because just offshore there are endangered soft coral reefs, water aquifers that spring up amongst the beautiful rocky coast they call Gurumbi, fresh water that feeds the entire island. Endangered red crabs crawling around amongst the rocks, amongst the plant life and other aquatic life amongst the rocks, where the people have worshipped nature for 450 years and worshiped their lost relatives. And today the Samsung Corporation, yes, that Samsung Corporation, they have a construction division. They're the lead contractor for the base. And today they're blasting Gurumbi Rock, blowing it up, and then they're going to bring in cement trucks and covered in cement to build the wharfs and the piers for the U.S. Navy warships. And so people have been going to jail over and over and over again for 5 years, being arrested trying to block this base. And so our organization has been supporting them since 2008. And they asked us to come there in February to bring our annual meeting. Every year we hold an annual meeting in a different country around the world to shine a light on this militarization of space and this technology that is being used. And so we went there in February. And on the first day, they took us to the 4.3 Museum in a nearby community. 4.3 stands for April 3rd, 1948. For many years, more than 40 years, the Japanese imperialist fascists occupied Korea, and they were brutal. My friends in Korea say, Bruce, you know why we like spicy food so much? The Japanese hated spicy food, and we made our food spicier and spicier. It was one way they could maintain their dignity under this brutal occupation. But after World War II was over and the Japanese were defeated, the United States took control of Korea. And who did we put in charge of the new government of Korea? The former collaborators, the former Koreans who collaborated with the Japanese fascist occupation. Hated even more than the Japanese were these collaborators who betrayed their own people. And we put them in charge as we set up a puppet government and put them in charge of the military, the state security apparatus. And the people revolted across Korea. They didn't want these collaborators running their country. They wanted to be free to pick their own leaders. And this is what led to the Korean War. That today is not over. No peace treaty has ever been signed. It's still underway. There's just a truce. And on Jeju Island, little Jeju Island, the people revolted. They were very independent. They revolted against this U.S.-imposed dictatorship. And so the U.S. military sent in the new government's military to suppress these people. And so we went to this 4.3, this April 3rd museum, where we saw the whole story and all the articles and all the pictures of the American military directing this entire massacre that began on April 3rd, 1948, where they massacred 30,000 people on Jeju Island. 1 out of every 9 residents were massacred. And so there's a deep, deep scar there amongst the people, as you can imagine. And so as a way to heal that scar, a few years ago, the South Korean government named Jeju Island the Peace Island. And so isn't it ironic that today the Peace Island is having a Navy base built there for the United States of America so that we can control China? Well, on the second to last day we were there on the island, the villagers wanted us to see Gurumbi Rock, the sacred rock. But you can't see it anymore. You can't get there anymore because Samsung has created a huge fence all the way around the military base. And along the coastline, they put razor wire. So the people took us out there in kayaks, shuttling us one after the other out to the Gurumbi Rock. And 16 of us climbed under the razor wire and were arrested and taken to jail. And when I returned, I said, I got to get more people to go here. And so I sent an email out to our list asking people to donate. I found 2 members of Veterans for Peace, a group that I belong to, who would be willing to go if I could raise the money. And so money came in, poured in, enough money for 6 people. So we found 3 people to go immediately. And when they arrived, these 3 members of Veterans for Peace, when they arrived in Korea, they were met by the South Korean security forces who had their pictures on a piece of paper and apprehended them and put them on a plane and sent them home. And the only thing they told them was, you're not welcome in Korea. But then we found this other guy, this other member of Veterans for Peace from Bellingham, Mike Jacobson, and he said he was willing to go, take a crack at it. And we found another way to slip him in. So he just returned a week ago after 3 weeks there in the village. He said when he got there, the people were so depressed because they were so brokenhearted that these 3 members of Veterans for Peace had been turned away. And a week later, a Japanese peace delegation was turned away by the Korean government. And they were so excited to see Mike, so happy that he had broken through, because they're trying to get people around the world to hear their story and to know what's happening. So friends, you know, they say we have somewhere between 700 and 1,000 U.S. military bases around the world today under this program of security export. Out of every discretionary tax dollar, about 60 cents of your tax dollar goes to the Pentagon today. And you know there's no money for anything else now. No money for health care. They're privatizing education. No money to do this, no money to do that. except wage endless war. So how in the hell do we get out from behind this 8-ball? What do? Well, thank God for the University of Massachusetts at Amherst Economics Department, who's done the definitive study on this question of military spending. In a study that published last December, it's available on our website, spaceforpeace.org. They looked at $1 billion of military spending and they said, okay, all right, it's true. We acknowledge it. You spend $1 billion on military production. It's true. You create 8,600 jobs. It's true. But they said you take that same $1 billion and you put it into home weatherization, something we really need where I live in Maine because we have the oldest housing stock in the country that is leaking. Last year, we had an energy audit of our house built in the late 1700s. It's a 15-room house. I live in an intentional community. And what they found was the equivalent of a 4-foot hole in our house that we were generously using to heat our entire neighborhood. And so we had our house weatherized. It was very expensive. But weatherization programs at the state level and at the federal level are being cut today under the austerity budget. But they found at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst Economics Department that if we took that $1 billion and didn't put it into military production, where they'd get 8,600 jobs per billion, you'd create 12,000 jobs per $1 billion doing home weatherization. Or if you put it into healthcare, you'd create 12,300 jobs. Or if you put it into education, you'd create 19,100 jobs per $1 billion. Or my favorite, if you put it into building a national rail system, getting us out of our gas-guzzling cars, helping maybe in a tiny, tiny way solve for the coming ravages of climate change, ending our need to go to war endlessly for oil, you'd create 19,675 jobs per $1 billion. So let me check with you all. I've been taking a poll everywhere I go along this trip. I want to see a show of hands. How many of you would be in favor of $1 billion of your tax dollars going for 8,600 jobs doing military production? Please raise your hand high so I can see it. Let it be said that I don't see any hands in the audience. How many of you would be willing to spend $1 billion of your hard-earned tax dollars building a national rail system, connecting every corner of this nation, getting us out of our gas-guzzling cars, creating 19,675 jobs per $1 billion? Please raise your hand high. Let it be known that virtually every hand here is held high. You all match everyone from San Diego north. Thank you very much for that. And so I say, why don't we make a demand? You know, last time we had this evil, dark economic system in America called slavery, one of the great abolitionists, Frederick Douglass, said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and it never will. So what's our demand today as we try to get rid of this dark, evil economic system called the military-industrial complex? What's our demand? What's our transformative, alternative vision, our unifying demand that brings together labor unions who would benefit from the conversion of the military-industrial complex because we'd create jobs? The environmental community who says they want to stop climate change. They want to end pollution. Well, the military is the biggest polluter on the planet with the largest carbon bootprint on the planet. The peace movement, all the movements would benefit from the conversion of the military-industrial complex. Why do we not join hands across the progressive community and make a demand to convert the military-industrial complex that is using our tax dollars? Because who's going to invest in jobs in this country unless we do? Because the corporations are moving jobs overseas like rats off a sinking ship, right? They're not going to invest back here in this country. Who's going to create a solar society? Who's going to create a national rail system? Who's going to do home weatherization? Who's going to fund a single-payer health care program? If we don't do it, it ain't going to get done. So let us make a demand. Friends, let me say this, and then I want to show a video from Jeju Island, 5-minute video. Our Mother Earth today is taken a pounding by the Pentagon and NATO, its wars. Her body is in toxic shock right now as she's wildly thrashing about. And the next 7 generations are pleading with us. They're pleading with us to take a visit to the Wizard of Oz, to get some courage, to get some determination, to stand up and fight for their future, so they'll have a future. Let me leave you with this question, and I ask you to go home and think about it, maybe talk to friends and family about it, ask them to consider it as well. What's the most important job of a human being on the earth today? What does it mean to be a human? What's the difference between a human and a tick? Thank you all very much for listening, and we'll take that video. Thank you. Let me get out of the way. Thank you.
파란 하늘과 푸른 바다 갈매기도 그대도 날 사랑했죠. 모두 다 줬죠. 그대니까요. 나의 몸도 마음도 다 주었죠.
I thought this was
언젠가부터 시작됐죠. 알 수도 이해할 수도 없는 서로의 이야기. 가슴이 아파 이대로 끝인 걸.
Why don't you start it over with the music starts?
While they're doing their buffering magic, whatever, to make it upload, we're going to have some time for some questions and answers. Maybe we could take 1 or 2 while they let it buffer so that it'll hopefully then run straight through. Would you like to answer maybe some other questions?
Well, let's wait.
We'll just wait.
안아줬죠. 그대니까요. 나의 몸도 마음도 다 주었죠. 언젠가부터 시작됐죠. 할 수도 이해할 수도 없는 서로의 이야기. 가슴이 아파 이대로 끝인 걸까. 누가 내 심장을 다 태워버렸나. 두 팔도 두 다리도 이대로 주저앉아 내 몸이 뜯겨진다. 그대 날 버렸다. 어느새 뜸해진 우리 시간이 그렇게 갈라놨지. 가슴이 아파 이대로 끝난 걸까. 누가 내 심장을 다 태워버렸나. 두 팔도 두 다리도 이대로 주저앉아 내 몸이 뜯겨진다. 그대 날 버렸다. 이대로 사라져 버린다면, 이대로 무너져 버린다면. 아름답던 풍경도 좋아했던 요리도 더 이상 그대에게 난 줄 수가 없어. 누가 날 도와줘요. 나를 좀 구해줘. 이 두려움 퇴금 속에 이 무서움 fade away.
So on the table over here is our newsletter with a couple articles about Jeju Island, and also there's a newsletter from the villagers themselves that you can pick up. We're asking people to help spread word about a boycott of Samsung, again, who's the lead contractor on the Navy base project. On Monday, why don't you come over here and announce it?
On Monday, if you noticed in the video, if you were paying hard to You may have missed it, but there was some graffiti art. There was an oil drum, for one, with graffiti art on it. And an artisan peace activist, Gilchin Ko, is here in the Seattle area right now and has an exhibit in Seattle, which is almost over. But on Monday, this Monday at 4 p.m., we, Bruce, myself, many others, will be joining Gilchin and hopefully many others. And there's a quarter-page flyer you can grab on the way out. There will be a protest in front of the Seattle South Korean consulate, asking them, pleading with them, urging them to hear our voices in support of the people of Jeju Island and peace instead of preparations for war. So no Navy base. So there's a quarter-page flyer. Take one, take a few, share them with friends, and anybody who either isn't working can get off work early and join us. It'll be a worthwhile effort. And so come on out.
And it'll be a great photo opportunity for us to send back to the village to let them know that people out there care and are supporting them. Because as I said, they've been at it for 5 years now, and they're exhausted, physically and emotionally exhausted, because they do this every day. 12, 14 hours a day, they're in the street blocking cement trucks, blocking construction trucks, being arrested, getting in the kayaks, trying to go out to Gurumbi, to go under the wire, to get back on, to stop the blasting, stop the cement from being poured. And I don't know if you saw, there were quick flashes here, but even in their little port now, the police come, they bring in 1,500 at a time from the mainland, and they surround the kayaks, so they can't even get in their kayaks now. And they will literally, the last day I was there, I watched them for 14 hours. The police surrounded their kayaks, and for 14 hours, they struggled trying to take their kayaks away from the police. These people know what fascism looks like. They know what it smells like because they've been controlled by it for a long time. And they believe in standing up to it with every breath they have. Their entire way of life is at stake. They have a saying in the village, who will speak for the rocks? Who will speak for the coral? Who will speak for the water? Who will speak for the fish? And they're speaking for it. And they're asking us to join them. So I'll take your questions or comments.
So, Bruce, I always have a question where I come around. I always come back to the same question. Are these people going to live in the same dystopian future that they are creating? Where is that disconnect? When I think about my great-great-great-grandchildren, I actually am there with them. Don't they have one too? I mean, I know I'm not articulating this very well.
Oh, you're articulating it extremely well. Did everybody hear it? These people that are running the show, this oligarchy, this corporate criminal syndicate that runs everything, why are they so disconnected? Don't they understand that they're fouling the nest? And it's the perfect question. It's the most fundamental question. Thank you for asking it. And as an answer, I will give the response from a book called Lame Deer, Seeker of Visions, a Lakota wise man who said that they noticed that when the white man came to this continent, that his love for the green frog skin was so great, for the dollar bill was so great, that he couldn't see how he was fouling his own nest. His quest for greed and power and money was so strong that there was a spiritual disconnection, a brokenness between the white man and the Mother Earth. When it rained, the white man didn't really care about where the water went and how the water was being contaminated and how that was the source of life. And so ultimately, I think the answer is that some people are so addicted to materialism and consumerism and power and money and greed that it's like a broken stick, that their spirit is broken. It's a spiritual question, I think, and a spiritual answer, not a religious answer, but a spiritual one, I believe. And so we, in our logical minds, try to sort out, how could they, how could they, how could they, how could they? It doesn't make any sense. It's not logical. But they're not on this logical plane, if you will, because they're in another dimension, if you will. And this is a problem. And so I think that we have to begin to understand, at least this is my opinion, that if we hope to make sure that there is a future for your grandchildren, we, like the villagers on Gagnon, have to intervene. We have to stand up to these people that are destroying and destroying and destroying, and we have to take away their power. We have to do it nonviolently, otherwise we become like them. But we must have more courage than we've ever had before. Yes?
So how best do us suburbanites who live in our comfy, happy little places stand up against these things that you're speaking about?
Well, I think this place right here, I would say, is a good example. I would call this a mind decolonization center. Okay? Would you agree? And we need a lot more of that, because what I've learned just about my own self, those first 17 years of living behind the barbed wire fences on the military bases, I think of it like our head has a lid. Lift the lid, pour patriotism, military schools, consumerism, corporatization, you know, media, you know, all the training that we get, all of the mental colonization, branding, corporate branding. How many people do you notice walk around with T-shirts on where they're advertising for a corporation? Oftentimes they even buy the T-shirt. And then they, for free, go around and do advertising for a corporation. I mean, if that's not the epitome of corporate mind colonization, what is, you know? And so I believe we have to lift the lid, drain, and then for the first time in our lives, take back our own humanity, take back our own consciousness, and become human beings for the first time. And in this place, I can see we do it together. We help each other in that process. So that's where we start. And then, of course, you know that we have to change the way we live. We have to change the way we move, the way we travel around, because all of it has implications. Last night, when I spoke in Bellingham, this guy came up to me afterwards and said that they had this Canadian speaker recently, and someone said to him, what about, you know, overpopulation, Africa and Asia and everything else? Isn't that what's really causing all the problems in the world? And he said, no, actually it's not. He said, because they're not really using the resources. It's us here in Canada and United States, particularly in the United States, we're 5% of the world's population, and we use 25% of the resources of the planet, which means that we've got to go around with our military and kill people in order to extract those declining resources around the world. And so, where do we start? Yes, sir.
On June 5th, every year I celebrate with some East Indians their freedom in 1968. They signed their constitution in 1947. And in 1968, they were liberated. I didn't know why that was such a big day until later. That's when Bobby Kennedy was shot. His family, they were considered Orthodox Brahmin of India. And so many of our leaders come from that part of the world where they've had these fights for thousands of years. And I would mention in that I flew to Fiji and watched their videos of their history in a community I met, Edmonds, Washington here. And they laid it right out. When he was shot the next day, millions of people rushed the compound, which we would call the Kennedy compound, but it was a Raj. So many of our leaders come from other parts of the world, from families that have objectives that are thousands of years old. And that's what we have to break if we want to break. The guy that was the chairman of the 1953 border in Korea also partitioned Pakistan from India, the very same guy. So we served as the military, died for him, and then some guy from what we call Pakistan today, but India was
Thank you. Thank you for that. Anyone else? Yeah.
So as a parent of an 8-year-old boy who loves BBUs and loves swords and and of course I bring him here a lot, but and I'm also a preschool teacher with little ones. So what's your advice about how we raise these kids that are going to take over, and mainly to get them out of that fear? Because I got pulled over a few months ago, and the first thing my son said is, "Are you going to jail?" And he doesn't even watch television, and this is the message.
Well, I understand. I was a single dad, and when my son was very young, his favorite toy was a cash register. And I was horrified. I was so worried that he was going to become a banker, you know. So, but you know, I didn't ever buy any guns and things for him. But like most little boys, he was very creative in creating guns out of every possible thing that he could find laying around, you know. I think the most important thing we can do for our children is to show them that we're doing something. Years ago, I learned that psychologists had found that the most adjusted kids were those whose parents were working on these issues, because it gave them a sense of hope that indeed someone was working on it, someone was trying to make things better. Mommy and daddy, you know, or whatever, I see them doing this. That makes me a little safer. So I think that's the most important thing, that we can give our children that sense of security. But even that gets smashed at times. In 1989, I came home one day from a demonstration at the Space Center where we were protesting the launch of plutonium by NASA. And there was my 9-year-old son standing at the door with a gas mask on. And in his most serious voice, you can imagine this as a parent, him trying to make me feel better, him trying to take care of me. He says, Dad, it's okay, don't worry about it. If Galileo blows up, I could just wear this gas mask for the rest of my life. And in that moment, my heart died. Because as a parent, you want to protect your kids, right? You want to make sure they don't ever have to face, especially at 9 years old, that kind of a thought. And if there was ever any question how I would spend the rest of my life, it was washed away in that moment. So I just say it's not a perfect world, and it's always going to be a challenge, but just try to stay true to your work. Show them another way. And when they get to be about 13 and they say they don't want to come to anything anymore, be really reflective about that. Because my son grew up, I was an organizer his whole life, right? I took him to everything. On Saturdays, he's got to come to this. You know, he's got to sit in the corner and all that kind of thing. It's no coincidence today that he's a debate coach. So, but anyway, when he got to be about 13, he didn't want to go to anything anymore. And I said to myself, okay, Bruce, this is that moment, because if you make him do this now, you're going to lose him. And so from then on, I would ask him, I would invite him, and he would always say no, and I would always make some alternative plans for him, not wanting to put him in a situation where I disrespected his desire to begin to be his own person. And I think it worked out all right. So I think that's the real age you want to be looking out for. Thanks. Thanks for your question.
And in my experience, they get a little older and they come back.
Oh, that's good. Looking for money, right?
Yeah. Sometimes.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Well, I think one of the things that I've observed is that we find wars for resources. And, you know, as we've gone through, we fought for diamond or gold or oil. Pretty soon it'll be for water.
Yeah.
And then the only other thing after water would be air. So,
That's it. That's right.
we're out of air, we're out of
Yeah. And so, you know, we got to look at how we, what gives us the right as natural gas and oil and water and other minerals become more and more scarce. What gives us the right to think that we should control all of that?
Is there any story that you can share with us where you've seen the tide of the military-industrial complex that does crap like this turn? Anything that we can use as a uplifting way to walk away from this? And then, related but not so, what's your ideas, if you have any, on why in the world the Department of Homeland Security and INS are buying 450 million rounds of hollow point bullets? Being that those are not approved to be used in the military, and the Department of Homeland Security, I go to those borders, and INS are supposed to only be operating within our borders. Why do they need that?
Well, first, there are many instances around the country where military bases have been turned into something more positive. That's happened over and over and over again, especially during this recent years where literally even the Pentagon at $1.4 trillion a year, when you add up all the related budgets, the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office, where they fly the satellites, the NSA, the National Security Administration, intercepting all communications, the Homeland Security, Department of Energy, nuclear budget, black budget, you know, all these other budgets along with the Department of Defense. When you add it all up, $1.4 trillion a year. But even they're running out of money because their plans are so big. That's why they're forcing South Korea to build a military base, because we can't afford to do it. So we're now forcing our allies to do these things on our behalf. So recently they've had to start closing bases around the country to save money. They call it the BRAC round, B-R-A-C. And so in many cases, there's some really good things happening around those places. So it can be done. And in fact, it always turns out much better. More jobs are created, better things are happening. The second part of your question, I believe that we're now all being brought onto the reservation, just like Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull were. And what I mean by that is because of computerization, mechanization, robotics, and outsourcing of jobs overseas, we now have superfluous populations here in America and around the world, but here in America. And so that means that millions and millions of us are no longer needed. So there's nothing worse than having highly educated, unemployed people, because they become potential revolutionaries. So that's why you begin a process of privatizing education, destroying public education. When I was in Santa Monica 2 weeks ago, students at Santa Monica Community College marched on the Board of Trustees meeting because they were getting ready to pass a 300% increase in tuition. And 100 of them were pepper sprayed. Some of them had to be taken to the hospital. But the natives are getting restless. The Occupy movement, the natives are getting restless, beginning to link the issues to corporate domination. The corporations are drowning our democracy as they try to maximize profits overseas and to return us to what I call neo-feudalism. Take us all down a few notches. At the Space Command, they say that space technology, Star Wars, will be the largest industrial project in the history of the planet Earth. And so in Space News, one of the industry publication magazines, they ran an editorial a couple of years ago and said, look, we've got to be responsible corporate citizens. We've got to come up with a dedicated funding source to pay for all of this, and we have. And we're now sending our lobbyists to Washington to secure that funding source. And it is, they said, the entitlement programs that officially in America are Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and what's left of the welfare program. These are the programs that they've identified to defund. And so it's no coincidence that we now hear even the Democrats saying, well, you know, we're going to have to raise the retirement age in Social Security because of the fiscal crisis. We're going to have to begin to make cuts in Medicare and Medicaid. We're going to have to reduce the amount of food stamp money that food stamp recipients get every month because of the fiscal crisis. And so this is how they begin to deconstruct social progress across America. And it's not just being done in our country. My friends in England and Canada and Australia and Japan and South Korea, in the so-called first industrial world countries, are saying the same thing. They're lowering their standard of living by destroying social progress and building up their military to create this corporate, global military arm that supports capitalism and its extraction of declining resources around the world. And so I say to people, it's like two trains heading for collision. One is called social progress, and the other is called endless war to benefit the corporations. And one of these two trains has to be derailed. Which is it going to be? You want to stop war? You want to stop endless war? Fight for social progress. Fight for Social Security. Fight for health care. Fight for poverty programs, mental health programs, environmental cleanup programs. Fight for this because that puts us in conflict with the Pentagon budget. We have to beat it.
A while back, kind of realized that somewhere along the way, life became less worth than money. And so my constant internal conflict right now is, why is money worth more than life? And if money was taken out of the picture, besides goodwill toward man, do you, I guess I'm asking you personally, do you know of a start that we could start from that would refrain us from actually having to use a single piece of paper endowed with so much power?
Well, I think that's underway now. Lots of communities, I don't know about this community, but lots of communities are, what do you call it, time dollars and time banking. Lots of communities are doing that and doing it very effectively in many places where you're literally trading your skill for someone else's skill, sometimes even for medical treatment. And you wash dishes for, or clean a doctor's house for 2 hours, and they give you some medical treatment that you can't afford otherwise. So, we all have some kind of skill that we can trade. And so we're going to have to create these bartering situations. And that's what this whole transition town movement is about, that I think is extremely important. And that's springing up around the country too. So there's lots of really good things happening. I'll never forget when George Harrison died from the Beatles. I was in Philadelphia staying in a Catholic rectory that evening, and I was watching television, and they were playing some old interviews with Harrison. And they had this one arrogant guy interviewing Harrison and said, yeah, the Beatles, you sang about peace and love and all that stuff, but the truth is, you guys were a total failure, right? Because none of it happened. And Harrison said, well, actually, it's true that the politicians aren't paying a lot of attention to what we are all saying. He said, but you go into any community now, and you find places like this place right here, for example, in virtually every community. And you find veggie restaurants, and you find alternative healing centers, and you find all these different things, peace community offices, peace organization offices with actual staffs sometimes. And he said, in fact, the entire culture is now becoming infused with this new consciousness. And we've got to remember that it's becoming deeper and deeper into our culture, this thinking. And so, in fact, as I heard someone say a couple days ago, it's the hippies against the military. And the hippies are stronger than we think that we are. And there are many manifestations of hippies, you know what I mean? But, so I think we have to remember that. And Harrison said that is he called it 50-50. He said it's 50-50. So we very well could be close to the tipping point now. Because, I got to tell you, as I travel, people come up to me afterwards and say things like, I got to tell you, I really admire what you do. I wish I could do it too, but, I've got to put the kids through college, and and all this kind of stuff. I hate my job. I work for a corporation. We treat people like shit. I've seen them laying off people, and now I'm doing the job of 2 and 3 other people. I hate these damn corporations, man. And so more people are with us than you can imagine. But they just don't know how to get out from behind the 8 ball that they're locked in behind. And so everything we can do to help create this moment of liberation for people, that's why I think Occupy was so important, because it gave people a sense of hope. They say there's about more than 10% of the American people are on antidepressants. But they say that people that are depressed usually are the most perceptive people of all. And so there's no shame in feeling depressed and sad about the way things are. That in fact it means that you have a heart and that you really care, that you really feel everything. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. And if we acknowledge that, and then we try to help create ways for people to move into action, then things can move. And again, we're close to that tipping point. And when it tips, it could really move quickly. As we saw in the former Soviet Union, you know, all of a sudden, one night, the Berlin Wall fell, right? It just mysteriously fell. Nobody got killed, right? Well, that's not really what happened. For years, the Fellowship of Reconciliation was doing nonviolence training in the churches in East Berlin. The only place that people could safely have a political meeting was in the churches in East Berlin. Otherwise, the Stasi would come and lock them up. And so for years, FOR was doing training in these churches, knowing that someday there would be this tipping point. At some point, the people would be ready to move, and we've got to make sure that they're highly trained in nonviolence so that when the window opened, we could push through it and take down the wall and change society without people being killed. And that's exactly what happened. So here we are in America in this pre-revolutionary moment when the people are with us in a bigger way than ever before. But we've got to make sure that we're out training people in nonviolence and creating public events so people can see what's happening and making a demand, making a collective demand that we want to convert the military-industrial complex. We want to bring our war dollars home. That $10 billion we spend every month in Afghanistan. $10 billion times 12 months equals what? $120 billion a year. They say that 27 states in America are in fiscal crisis right now. And if you add up their collective debt, that $120 billion we spent in 1 year in Afghanistan could wash away the debt of every state in America. No more cuts necessary. Elect Ron Paul, is that what you said? Well, you know, it's not one politician's going to get us out of this. And it's not one day in a voting booth is going to get us out of this. It's going to take all of us pushing that rock up the hill together. How we doing? We got to go? That's it. Go ahead.
I just wanted to comment, we've talked a lot about the hippies versus the military, and, at the very top, the top feeder on the system are the banks, because every military dollar that the U.S. is borrowing comes from the banks. And Occupy is right to go up against the banks. And people may not be aware that we don't have to devolve all the way down to a barter economy to change the banks. In many states in the United States, people are we're organizing to get public banking. And what this does, like in the North Dakota model, what that does is it brings the profits from banking, from loaning, back into the community. It goes into, so rather than going to Bank of America and then they take it on a barge to China, it keeps coming into our community. So people can move their money, people can work for public banking, make sure your money is in a community bank or credit union. This is huge. I honestly think that Bank of America is going to go down this year. I really believe that. And they're not doing so well. But if everybody moves their money, if we had a public banking system in this country, which could absolutely happen, it would remove the profits from these banks that profit
Well said, thank you. Did you all hear that? Public banking. Take our money out of the big corporate banks. Let me ask a question. How many people here use working assets credit card? Anyone here have it? Working assets credit card?
I don't have a credit card.
Okay. Well, you know, working assets long distance, working assets credit card. It's a progressive company that funds, with some of the profits, funds good organizations. But I had one, working assets credit card, and then one day I paid attention to the back of it. It says Bank of America on it. Yeah, Bank of America. So we got rid of our working assets credit card. Okay, well, thank you all very much, and good luck to everybody here, and stay at it, all right?
I just want to make a small plug. There is a whole bunch of really great material over on the table over there. There is a DVD of one of Bruce's talks. There is some bumper stickers and lots of information. And there is also a jar over there. Bruce was kind enough to come here and on his own free time and his own dime, actually, and which we really appreciate. And just like we do with traveling musicians who come and bring and share their light on the stage, please, there is our customary tip jar over there. So let's help him get to his next destination and keep on spreading this amazing word. And then the other thing I'd like to announce, in about 5 minutes, we have Richard Smith, who will be coming up to the stage. And he's here today to talk about, to kind of give us some tools of, so we've got all this information, right? So we kind of know what we want to do. But this also means engaging people that we might have some issues with, who have more power than we do, or what we perceive. And Richard's gift is communication. And so he's going to come up in a couple of minutes, and then we're going to talk about how to talk to the man, or the woman, or the bank, or the military, or whoever you have a power paradigm with. So thank you very much for coming today, and thank you, Bruce.
Thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you. That would actually highly entertain the crap out of me.
I think I'm just gonna.
Never come with a warning. A revolution never sends you an omen. A revolution just arrive like the morning. Ring the alarm, we come to wake up the snoring. They're telling you to never worry about the future. They're telling you to never worry about the torture. They're telling you that you will never see the horror. Spend it all today and we will build you tomorrow.